Hey everybody, welcome back to Warpaint Off-Road. I'm Dan, and this is a TJ. That's right, guys. A TJ. You haven't really seen this Jeep in my garage, but you've definitely seen this Jeep on the channel. This is Centex Jeepers' other Jeep.
That's called a big ass rock.
You guys know the story, I've already said it, but he's downsizing his fleet.
No way. Way.
We're gonna be getting rid of the JKU.
Maybe $50,000.
But if you guys wanna know the best way to axle swap a TJ onto a reliable axle that can handle a fairly big tire, this is the way to set it up. So let me give you a quick walk around before I dive in and let you know what we're gonna do and get that work started. So you may or may not know a ton about TJ axles, but they didn't come with the strongest axles from the factory, because back when these rigs were new, if you had 33s, you were the man. But times have changed. Things have gotten bigger, suspensions have gotten better, and the obstacles have gotten harder the more we wheel them and the more dug out things get. So people are putting bigger and bigger tires on these. The factory axles, they just can't handle it. In come the JK axles. Now, JK axles are wider, and JK Dana 30s and JK Dana 44s are not the same as the Dana 30s and Dana 44s that were in older rigs. In fact, a JK Dana 44 with a truss and gussets and heavy duty ball joints and chromoly axle shafts and all that kind of stuff is a very strong axle. The problem we have with them in JKs is the fact that a JK is so heavy.
I don't want people making fun of my weight.
Okay, that's too broad. It's got to be something else. How about your stomach?
You reach this axle's maximum potential pretty quickly. But when you throw it underneath a TJ, it's such a light rig, it gives you the added width because they are wider than the TJ axles. And it allows you to basically run something like a 38-inch tire very reliably and have the width to actually flex it out. Now, getting those JK axles under this TJ actually isn't that difficult, and you can check out this video to learn more about how it was done. But today, we're gonna start with these pretty girls, right? This is a Super Duty Dana 60, and this is a GM Corporate 14 bolt. You want to know how to build them, you want to know how to re-gear them, all those videos are on the channel. But I'm going to start with the rear axle today, and the goal is to get the rear axle out of this TJ today, off to the side, and get this 14 bolt slid underneath. With the wheels safely chocked so the Jeep won't run me over, I got underneath it, and the first step was to remove the drive shaft. I then supported the body of the Jeep with some really tall jack stands and jacked up the rear axle. Now it was time to take off the wheels and tires. Now, the next thing that we're gonna be doing over here, we're gonna disconnect shocks, okay? The reason we're gonna do that is so we can completely droop the axle and then we don't have to mess with a spring compressor.
Why don't you punch me in the face?
The spring will just fall out once the axle is allowed to fully droop. So we're gonna disconnect the sway bar link from the axle. And before I disconnect the control arms, right, the lowers and the uppers, I'm gonna grab a measurement of those control arms just to make sure that I can get this axle maybe a little bit more easily located in place and that the measurements don't change. I always like to measure everything. That way, if there's a question, once I get it all pulled apart, there's really no way to go back, right, and get that measurement when you wish you had it. So I like to grab those, right, from bolt to bolt on the control arms. And then, again, we're going to disconnect the shocks, sway bar, lower the axle down, and this axle is going to roll out. Now guys, these axles are super heavy. 1-tons are even heavier. When there's nothing holding that axle onto the Jeep, you need to make sure you have nothing underneath it that you don't want crushed. So when you lower it down, it doesn't happen to fall off of a jack and maybe crush your leg. Now you may have noticed this spring didn't just fall off when the axle was completely lowered away. And that's because there was a spring retainer on the top perch. So I unbolted that and we were able to pull away the spring. So as you saw, that spring retainer got a little stuck on there. That can happen with the grime and rust and things like that sometimes happen with these. Now, these spring retainers, this is a different setup here because of that axle stretch. Your TJ obviously isn't going to have that unless you set it up the same way. It's a good idea though, right? To keep that spring in there. He was running 14-inch travel shocks on this with a rock crawler spring that had a lot of droop, but it had more droop than the spring had. So with having the bump stop down here, even though the spring would rise off of the bottom plate, it would never rise high enough to go above this and fall off, right? You can kind of see it over there. The axle's drooped, but the spring is still being held in. You wouldn't have that issue if you had a coilover, but without sitting the Jeep too high, but still wanting as much flex as possible, that was the way it was built, and it worked really, really well, as you've seen in some of my other videos. On to remove that other side, unbolt these links, roll this axle out of here. All right, guys, so it's basically it for day one. We got our uppers and lowers out. We got our axle out. Super, super simple, but it's hot. I gotta cut the grass, I gotta get to work. I have that JK Dana 44 sitting over here, waiting to go back to its home under a JK. And we got all the control arms down there. That's how you, I guess, managing a oversized 1-car garage, right? Technically it's a 2-car, but you ain't fitting 2 cars in here. All this stuff is gonna go back on the leaf spring rig without the leaf springs. We're gonna do something kind of fun with that suspension, so stay tuned, but day 2 coming at you pretty soon.